Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Build a Mind podcast. I'm your host, Trevor Bello. Today, I have another awesome and thrilling story to tell you guys to talk about. We're going to be having a conversation with the creator of Seedsigner. If you're not familiar with Seedsigner, Seedsigner is an air-gapped hardware wallet that you can build yourself. It's really cool project. So it really lowers the barrier of entry for anyone who's looking to store their own key or hold their own keys. And the common trope in Bitcoin is not your keys, not your Bitcoin. So this is a great opportunity for anybody who's kind of curious about hardware solutions and holding your own keys, especially if you've never done that before. If you've got your keys on a piece of paper, or you're just using a regular you know hot wallet. We want to make sure that you're using a cold storage wallet, something that's air gapped, not connected to the internet, something that's really simple to use. And while this might not be the easiest solution out there, it is definitely one of the cheapest solutions. And it's always a fun thing to kind of get your head around learning how different components work. I mean, the Seed Signer it's like 4 components and it's less than $50. So I think I paid $210 or something like that for my hardware wallet. And, it was super easy to set up, but it didn't give me the ability to learn about the different components and understand a little bit more on a foundational level of like what's inside the hardware wallet. So this will give you a great opportunity to learn about it. We're going to talk with the creator of Seedsigner, and we're going to just kind of figure out how this project came along. What are some of the exciting benchmarks that have happened along the way? And also, the security model that comes with the Seed Signer, and then also, being able to store your keys on a piece of metal. So, I mean, being able to store the keys on a piece of metal, and then having your hardware wallet is like this ultimate custody solution of being self-sovereign and holding your own Bitcoin and having custody of that. So it's going to be super exciting. I want to dive right into it. Before we dive right into it, I've got something to show you.
Join the Mastermind Club, a weekly gathering of Bitcoin miners sharing insights to help you optimize or build your mining business. Our community fosters open discussion and collaboration, connecting you with experts who can help you overcome challenges and find solutions faster. Every other week, we host the Mastermind Deep Dive, where industry leaders delve into the financial, operational, and optimization hurdles faced by miners like you. Brought to you by Bitcoin Mining World.
All right, guys, I made it super easy. Go to the QR code at the bottom of your screen right now to join the Mastermind Club. It's completely free. It's a great opportunity for anybody who's looking to build and expand their Bitcoin mining operations. So, all right, man. Hey, I appreciate you being on the show today. Thank you so much for your time. This is going to be a cool conversation. We're going to talk about the Seed Signer and, how you got into this project. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I appreciate you having me here for this conversation. I've been looking forward to it.
Awesome. I love to hear that, man. It's a cool thing being able to talk to Bitcoiners who are doing all kinds of things. This is a mining centric podcast, so we're not really going to be focusing too much on the mining aspect. But anybody who's been mining Bitcoin before knows, like, hey, where do I store my Bitcoin? Where do I keep it? And so I think this kind of just ties into anybody who's learning about Bitcoin and learning about Bitcoin mining. Understanding your keys and having self-custody of your Bitcoin is a very important step. And so we're going to kind of just dive into that. Before we dive into the Seed Signer project itself, I was hoping that you could kind of give us a little bit of background on your Bitcoin rabbit hole story, just kind of help the audience understand how you came into Bitcoin and what that catalyst was for deciding to develop a hardware solution.
So some people have told me it's one of the more interesting rabbit hole stories in Bitcoin, but I actually discovered Bitcoin at work. I was a police officer for 15 years, and during the majority of my career, I was a digital forensic analyst. So I worked in a computer lab and would take apart phones and computers and other digital storage devices and see if they held evidence that either supported an allegation that a crime occurred or refuted an allegation that a crime occurred. And the first time I heard about Bitcoin was actually at work. There was it was kind of like water cooler talk. There was another examiner who was working on an investigation where a local kid who had received what at the time was probably a pretty expensive gaming rig system with a couple of GPUs. This was in like 2012 or 2013, so it was still when you could viably mine Bitcoin with GPUs. And instead of gaming all the time, this kid used this computer to mine Bitcoin that he would then take to the Silk Road and use to purchase weed. And he was then repackaging the weed and selling it at school. And of course, the principal found out and called the police and all this kind of thing. So this enterprising kid got his computer seized, and it ended up at our forensic lab. And this other examiner in the lab was tasked with figuring out, how this whole thing was going down. That was my first touch point with Bitcoin, and that, of course, sent me to Google and just going down the rabbit hole of figuring it all out. Like, what is all this compute being used for? How does this work? Blah blah blah. So I spent a fair amount of time early on Bitcoin Talk and then on Reddit, just kind of wrapping my mind around this thing that was Bitcoin. And early on, I did a little bit of mining. This was just as ASICs were starting to come on the scene. So there was a company called Butterfly Labs that I'm from St. Louis. And as luck would have it, Butterfly Labs was actually headquartered on the other side of the state of Missouri where I live. But they were one of the earliest, I guess you could say, consumer-facing. You say consumer-facing. I probably most all mining at that point was consumer-facing. It wasn't like they had these huge data centers. But Butterfly Labs was one of these early companies that was selling ASICs, and they've developed into this meme in the Bitcoin space. If you've ever encountered the 2 weeks meme, that was whenever you would inquire, because they sold pre-orders for miners, and whenever you would inquire when the miners were going to be in stock and ship, since you'd already paid for the money and you were waiting for them to come, they would inevitably always say about 2 weeks. So anyhow, I did some mining early on, and of course, went down the rabbit hole of all of the other shit coins at the time, although they weren't really shit coins. It was just like the whole space was exploding, and no one knew at that time that Bitcoin was necessarily going to be the winner or the one that survived or grew the most. So anyhow, I kind of followed Bitcoin in a more private way for the next few years, geeking out on it, and bought a little bit, as I said, played with mining. And the Bitcoin that I bought early on, as it turned out, appreciated a bit and paved the way for me to exit from my law enforcement career. I'd like to say I played the trade better than I did, but I had a weak hands event in 2017, very early on in 2017, when the price got to about $2,000 or $2,200. I arrived at the point where if I sold every single set that I owned, we would be able to pay off our house and any other debt that we have and kind of start this brand new debt-free life, my wife and I. And coming from a pretty middle-class kind of background, you're not wired out of the box for that kind of financial gain. And so, like I said, weak hands moment, I sold everything all at once, very clumsily as a market sell. But it paved the way for me to exit my law enforcement career and be a stay-at-home dad, which was a huge blessing. And after I left work in, I believe it was 2019, I had kind of set Bitcoin aside in 2017 because I'd sold all of it, and the price just kept going up and up and up, and I did not want to hear about Bitcoin for a period of time because it was like, oh my gosh, how much did I miss out on? And it peaked later in 2017, and then in 2018, as the price came down a little bit, and it came down more and more, I just started paying attention to Bitcoin again. But this time it was from a much more ideological, freedom-oriented kind of perspective. I had concerns about the direction of our country, I'm an American, the direction of America's finances, the amount of debt that we're accumulating, and my kids are getting older, and I'm wondering what kind of world we're going to be leaving behind for them. So I started to pay attention to Bitcoin again, listen to the same podcasts. I got active on Twitter again, but this time, as I said, it was from a much more ideological perspective and more concerned with freedom and sustainability of my finances as well as the world's economy. So as I exited from my law enforcement crisis, started buying Bitcoin again, and of course paying higher prices than what I'd sold at, and ending up with a lot less Bitcoin than what I'd had. But as I started to think about my Bitcoin journey and taking self-custody, I wondered if the way that I was holding my keys might have contributed to the whole lettuce hands experience. And so, given my unique background in digital forensics that touches on information security and those kind of related fields, I started thinking about what is a way to hold the private keys that would make me more comfortable and a more confident holder. Because when you're experiencing those gains and you're not confident about how secure your keys are, you're just kind of one or two steps away from moving all of your money to an exchange, and from there it's just a few clicks to selling everything. Excuse me. And so I started thinking about and reading more about self-custody. I'd been doing a pretty good job at it before, but things had moved quickly in terms of the two developments that appealed to me at the time were air gapping and multisig. And I came across a podcast interview with a researcher called Michael Flaxman, and he had written this. It's called the 10x Bitcoin Security Guide. It's hosted on GitHub. It's still relevant. If your listeners Google for it, they should be able to find it easily. But it's this guide that gives you suggestions on how you can improve your security posture in the ways that give you the most bang for your buck. And Michael Flexman was talking about Spectre Wallet, which was a newer Bitcoin wallet at the time, and this device that was kind of a companion device to Spectre Wallet called Spectre DIY. So the idea of multisig was extremely interesting to me because, based on my experiences in law enforcement, it is such an asymmetrical tool that gives the advantage to the defender, the person who's trying to want to not have their Bitcoin taken from them, because it turns it into this, you don't have to just find one thing, you have to find multiple things that could be, in as many different places as you'd like, as near or as far away as you'd like. So multisig was extremely interesting to me. And as I said, I have a little bit of a technical background. So I built this Spectre DIY, which is a microcontroller-based hardware wallet / signing device that the first time I used it, it was a revelation to me, as much as the first Bitcoin transaction I made or the first Lightning transaction I made. It was just this very elegant solution to something that had always bothered me as someone with a forensic background, and that was the need to plug in your hardware wallet to your desktop or laptop computer via USB. Because when you're working in the forensic world, when you understand that when you plug something in via USB, things can happen very quickly that you don't know about. And if you can potentially update the firmware of that USB connection, really anything is possible. Now, some of this is edge case, maybe more paranoid sort of perspective, but cold storage is in some ways a confidence game. And those little nagging concerns that you have in the back of your mind can play an outsized role in making you do stupid things. So I pay attention to those nagging little kind of lizard brain things that bother me in cold storage. So USB connectivity had always bothered me, and this I don't know if your viewers would be familiar with it, but what the Spectre DIY did and what other hardware wallets that follow the same communication model use is they use QR codes to move information from the device that talks to the Bitcoin network. That's what we call a wallet coordinator, and that's able to communicate with the Bitcoin network and allow you to receive Bitcoin and to track a balance and it communicates information about your Bitcoin wallet to the hardware wallet or the signing device, which is a device that is intentionally very isolated from the internet and the Bitcoin network for obvious reasons, because that's where you use your private keys to generate signatures that allow you to spend money in the Bitcoin network. So anyhow, the QR exchange process was a revelation to me because it inherently limits the amount of information that can practically be exchanged between the two devices and makes potential exploits a lot harder. So another secret about me, I'm a cheapskate, and Spectre DIY was great. But as I said, I was very curious about multisig, and multisig, as it's been traditionally approached, you need obviously at least 2 or 3 devices to be able to start dabbling in multisig. If you want to have what I kind of saw as my ideal long-term setup, at least 5 cosigners in the wallet. Now you're in a place where you need to buy 5 hardware wallets, and as you said, your first one, you spent a couple $100. So even just getting to the point where you could start to tinker with multisig and decide if it made sense to you and it felt comfortable, I mean, now you're spending $500, $600, $700, $800 or more. So given my background in forensics, I was familiar with this idea of stateless operation of computers, where if you operate, say, a laptop in a mode where you use RAM to run all of the software in without storing anything or making any changes to the hard drive, you can actually use a computer and walk away from it without having left any trace that you used it on the device. So I thought, like, wouldn't it be great if you could just use one device to be able to manage all of the cosigners, and that device would be engineered in such a way that it doesn't store keys and it doesn't store any record of transactions you made or anything like that. So that was the genesis of Seedsigner, in that I basically took the same workflows from the Spectre DIY, which was a huge leap forward in and of itself, but that's a device that'll cost you $100, $150 to build. And I started tinkering with a Raspberry Pi after interacting with Michael Flaxman, the individual I mentioned before with the 10x Bitcoin Security Guide. And he had this idea to use a Raspberry Pi Zero, a very specific version of that didn't have Wi-Fi, it didn't have Bluetooth on board. So it was this naturally very isolated computing environment where you could be confident that any keys you created or used wouldn't be leaked to the outside world. Using that as a device first just to create keys, but then I realized if I attached a camera to it as well, I could mimic the QR exchange process that the Spectre DIY used. And that was, I've been talking for a minute here, but that was the genesis of the Seedsigner project and where it started to grow from.
Yeah, no, that was a great story. Great, kind of explainer of like how you came into Bitcoin. I do want to take it back to like one of the first things you said, like the whole story of like lettuce hands and selling your Bitcoin at a point where, it had appreciated significantly. Everybody comes to Bitcoin from a different place in their life. And what I would say is like the greatest opportunity in Bitcoin is to be able to exit the fiat lifestyle and move into a more holistic and meaningful life. I'm sure that you kick yourself a little bit as you're, going through life now that Bitcoin's at 100K and, like you lost a lot of that appreciation along the way. But one thing that I would kind of caveat that with is that like what you've gained is the way that you look at life. You were able to exit your 9-to-5 career. You were able to exit that fiat lifestyle, get out of all that debt, sell like buy your home outright, to where, you are more of a sovereign individual. I mean, yeah, you still have to pay taxes. Yeah, quote unquote, the state still owns your house. But at the end of the day, like you're no longer beholden to anyone other than your wife and your children, and yourself. And so I think that, in my personal opinion, I think you're being a little hard on yourself with the whole lettuce hands things. I mean, yeah, there's definitely that, like you shouldn't have sold all of it, but you're living a better life now. And I think arguably like you're in a much better position to build this project, to move forward with teaching people about self-sovereignty, hardware solutions. And so it's all part of your story. It's all part of like where you are. And I'll be honest, for me, as a new Bitcoiner, I've been in Bitcoin for a little over 2 years. I actually went back and looked at like the first time that I bought Bitcoin was 4 years ago, but I don't count that because like it wasn't really like, it was a smash buy. I'm like, oh, what is this? But like when I really started learning about Bitcoin, it was about 2 years, 2 months ago. And I would say like, if the value of my Bitcoin appreciates, which it will, enough to like pay off my credit card debt, pay off my home, and like be able to exit my fiat job, like I would do it too. And that maybe that's lettuce hands, maybe it's not, but I do think that the way of life that comes with not having to be beholden to credit card companies, beholden to your mortgage company, like it's a lot more stress-free, I guess, is what I was trying to get at.
And one other thing I'd mention is that I have 3 kids who, they're teenagers now, twins who are a little bit older and younger ones, but I think they were, I'd have to guess at the ages, but I think they were twins who were 9-ish, and the younger one would have been 5-ish at that point. And the time that I've been able to have with them as a stay-at-home dad is one of those, like, you'll never get that time back. I'll have that connection with them for the rest of my life. And the timing of it, gosh, when COVID happened and we went through this nightmare of the kids having to, do a semester of school at home with, telelearning or whatever you call it, just to be able to be with my family and guide them through that time, that is a huge blessing, and it's something the time I've had with my kids is also something you just can't put a price on. But you make a great point with exiting that fiat lifestyle, and that's part of this kind of indescribable magic of once you really understand Bitcoin, it changes you to some degree, and it kind of hardens it hardens you like steel, gets hardened to some extent. It's really it, yeah, there's definitely a metaphysical aspect to Bitcoin and being a Bitcoiner, and yeah, you're touching on it for sure.
Yeah. Well, I believe that metaphysical aspect, that ethos, that hardening of the steel that is yourself and your soul and your psyche, it comes from the fact that like money, as much as people hate to say it, money rules like at least 50% of our life, because one half of every trade-in transaction is money. And if that money is corrupt and is a lie and it's faulty, then like your life is corrupt, it's a lie, and it's faulty. I mean, it's just the bare bones of it. But when you are able to build your life around a money that is strong, secure, independent, all these great things about Bitcoin that we all tout, like your life slowly becomes a representation of that. And so for you've been able to exit fully and spend that time with your kids and look at life in a completely different way. I would argue that that is worth more than even Michael Saylor's stack. So at the end of the day, like,
Yeah, 100%.
congratulations to you for what you've been able to accomplish. And also think about it like this: you had that moment where you sold your Bitcoin, and that gave you the perspective that you now have to say, well, how do I find a better way of securing my keys so that it's not so easy for me to just click sell and sell my Bitcoin? So this leads us to 2020, when you started working on the Seedsigner project and developing what, in your eyes and arguably in reality, is one of the easiest ways and cheapest ways to get into self-storage, self-custody of your own Bitcoin. So people who aren't familiar, there's different types of wallets out there. You've got your exchange wallets, you have your hard or your hot wallets that are connected to the internet, that like Blue Wallet just on your phone, where you derive the keys from an internet connected device. What you're talking about, the Seedsigner, is an air-gapped cold storage hardware wallet model, where it's never connected to the internet, and it derives those keys on a device that allows you to store them safely. Your background as a computer, what was your title again? as a police officer?
Digital forensic examiner was the majority of where I spent my time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as a digital forensic and examiner, you have this like highly specific set of skills that kind of attuned you to do this exact thing. And so you were able to start building Seedsigner. I just kind of want to show people, I'm going to share my screen real quick because I think this is really cool. So these are the components of the Seedsigner itself. It looks like four components without the shell. You've got your LCD screen here. It's just a LCD wave share hat display. You've got your Raspberry Pi right here, the Pi Zero. You have a camera and a micro SD card. That's essentially all you need to get started on this. These are all off the shelf products that you can buy. You didn't actually design the hardware of the Seedsigner, but you did
Right.
design the software, right?
Right. The hardware is just off the shelf components. The software, so as we've referenced, I have a bit of a technical background. I studied management information systems when I was a little younger, but never ended up getting a job in that field directly related to it or anything like that. So I had some background in coding, but honestly, when I first started putting together the initial versions of Seedsigner, I watched uh, Udemy videos on how to code Python for like a week, binge watching them just to figure out the basic, programming mechanisms I needed to make Seedsigner do what I wanted it to do and put a proof of concept together. But thankfully, as I wrote the initial first versions of the software and then started sharing it with other people, fortunately, others who are way better programmers than me pitched in on the project, and now I do virtually no coding with the project. I kind of fill other roles, but uh, the people have stepped in to level up our software in terms of adding features to it, refining the security model, making it more stable and user friendly, creating an interface that's very accessible and intuitive to people. I can't emphasize how much, as you showed from the screen before, the components that make a Seedsigner up are very simple, but when you assemble them, the quality and finish on our software makes it feel more like something you would have purchased from a store or a Bitcoin retailer. I can't emphasize enough the user experience is really top notch, and that's something that has made the project and the device compelling to so many people that have tried it. If honestly, if Seed Center didn't work very well or it wasn't a great user experience, we probably wouldn't be around and we wouldn't have achieved the recognition that we've gotten to at this point. So some people can be a little put off or leery when they see that it's a DIY thing that you could build yourself, but we really punch above our weight class in terms of the quality of the device.
Yeah, and what you touched on there, especially about like the DIY aspect and the some people not really caring too much for it. I would argue that DIY is one of the best ways to understand how something works. I come from a construction background, a mechanical background. I don't understand coding. I don't understand computers very much. I'm honestly, like, the first time I ever opened a terminal window on my Mac was when I got into Bitcoin mining, and I was like, oh, I have to do this thing and figure this out. So it was the first time I ever did that. But what I do understand is the aspect of like building something, putting something, taking components of a device and stacking those components on top of each other and using whatever software you need to program it is a great way to understand how something works. I used to tear things apart. When I was 16, I would go inside of my car and I'd watch YouTube videos of how to take things out and put them back in. I pulled off the alternator. I didn't need to. I
Right.
pulled off the alternator, put it back, pulled out the starter, put it back, did all these things just to understand like the mechanical nature of what I was, working with. And so it's kind of like the same aspect of, you know, you can go buy a hardware wallet. You can spend, I think there's hardware wallets anywhere from like $80 to, $300. You can, however fancy you want to get. You can get the really nice one from Foundation. You can get, a cold card. You can get all these different really cool ones. They have different functionalities, but you don't understand the way that the device actually works. You don't understand like the components of it. You just kind of have this hardware device. Whereas with Seedsigner, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to jump in, and it's not just the functionality of the hardware, but in terms of breaking down using Bitcoin into components or subcomponents that are more easily understandable. When you use a seed signer, just the default workflow compels you to get a deeper understanding of what a private key is and where the private key comes from. Obviously, all hardware wallets hold a private key, but with most of them, when you power it on for the first time, it runs something called a random number generator that is supposed to create a private key that is unreproducible, unpredictable, and then keep that key secret. And with Seedsigner, we very intentionally don't want to create a private key for you. We want the user to provide some sort of input, because the whole what makes a private key secure is that it is this little bit of information that is fleeting and secret, and that no one else can guess, reproduce, or or get from you. And so with a seed signer, the user is going to have to, just to get a private key active on the device, they're going to either have to bring one that they already have, or they're going to use a few methods to create a private key, whether it's rolling dice, or we have a module where you can use random data entropy from the camera by taking a picture to create a private key. So not just with private keys, but then once you have that private key, you have to create the public version of the private key that your wallet uses to be able to derive addresses to receive Bitcoin from. And then the process of creating a transaction and then moving the transaction from the device that talks to the Bitcoin network to the seed signer, as I mentioned before, through the QR codes, creating signatures that allow you to spend the money, and then communicating those signatures back from the seed signer to your wallet coordinator, whether it be Sparrow or Blue Wallet or whatever you're using. The feedback that I consistently get from people, and I think what makes the device so compelling to people, is that once you've set up a wallet and used it with a seed signer, even if you continue using your own hardware wallet, you have a much deeper understanding of the nuts and bolts of how a Bitcoin wallet is created, put together, and then how transactions work. It's not a exhaustive deep dive that somebody who contributes to Bitcoin Core would have, but it's a deeper level of understanding that I think satisfies, as I mentioned before, those kind of lizard brain misgivings that we sometimes have when we use a hardware wallet. Because with the hardware wallet, the manufacturers in many cases do a good job of obscuring most of the complexity and such a way that it's kind of what I call this bebop boop experience, where you plug the thing in, you enter a passcode, and then you click yes to authorize the spend, but you don't really understand what's going on in the background. And a lot of Bitcoin users find themselves having this nagging concern of, what if my hardware wallet broke? How would I be able to reconstitute my wallet and still access all of my money just from these 12 or 24 words that the wallet told me to write down when I first set it up a year or two ago? And people have real misgivings about that, being able to reconstitute their money from the source material, that seed phrase. And with Seed Signer, just the way it makes you interact with the seed phrase and the spend process, the consistent feedback I get is that people are much more comfortable. If something were to happen to their phone where they have their wallet, they would be comfortable reconstituting that on a new phone or on their laptop or something. So it's Seed Signer really helps you grok Bitcoin, not at an ultra deep level, but at a deep enough level that it gives you a much more satisfied feeling in terms of your ability to really be in control of your money.
I would agree with that. It's I have my own hardware wallet. I have had this one for about a year now, and I love it. But it goes back to what you were saying, that beep bop boop. It's like It took me 20 minutes to set it up. It takes me 5 minutes to sign a transaction and, go on with my day. I feel very good about my security model. I do feel very good about, being able to reconstitute those keys, as you put it, on a different device if I needed to. And paired with, something like Stampseed it's a great security model. It's absolutely amazing, but it hasn't taught me anything about, as we were kind of discussing earlier, the foundational components and the way that the signing process works. So I'm very interested in, purchasing a kit to build this myself because I want to learn more about it. I want to dive into it. But what I also like about it is, I have a lot of friends that I've brought to Bitcoin. I wouldn't call it orange pilling just because I feel like people orange pill themselves, but I've brought a lot of people into Bitcoin, and some of those people have bought significant amounts of Bitcoin, but they're just holding it on like Blue Wallet or Sparrow or, Envoy, and they haven't really dove down the rabbit hole of hardware wallets and signing devices and all that stuff, which is something that I've been trying to stress to them, like, hey, you need to get yourself a hardware wallet. So what I like about this is, like, Christmas is right around the corner, man. Like, by the time this comes out, it'll be past Christmas, but this is a great device to purchase and, like buy like 10 of these, bring your friends over for a Bitcoin party or something like a Bitcoin 101 thing, and build these together, and do this as an event where everybody can kind of build their own hardware device, their storage device, and learn how the process works, and then get a little bit more comfortable with storing their keys on this device, which helps them protect and safeguard their Bitcoin. So I love this project.
And to be clear, that I hear about at Bitcoin meetups and other informal gatherings, people doing exactly what you're described, where they'll order, 10 sets of components, they all put them together. But then the neat thing about the device is because it does not persistently store your private keys, it really de-emphasizes the role of keys themselves. With the keys are obviously very important, but with Seedsigner, the cost associated with creating additional private keys is nominally zero. So you can, after you're sitting in a room full of your Bitcoin friends and you've all built these devices, jump on testnet, everybody create their own private keys, and let's all set up wallets and just send testnet coins around and see how you feel about the device and get comfortable with using it. Or maybe let's set up a multisig, and each of us will hold a key that's part of this multisig, and we'll take turns signing for co-signing for different key holders in the multisig quorum. Quorum was what I was trying to come up with. But what I'm getting at is with a Seedsigner, you can create one single sig wallet, you can create multiple single sig wallets, or you can create an entire quorum that is composed of 5 co-signers, and you can manage them all with a Seedsigner, or you can get several other hardware wallets and just use a Seedsigner to manage one of the members of your multisig quorum. I mentioned multisig before in terms of what if there is a government entity that's trying to come and take your Bitcoin and you're trying to defend against that, or what if there's a motivated, targeted attacker who's trying to steal your Bitcoin. For most people, even though that's something we may worry about from time to time, for most people, the bigger danger is you screwing up and either setting the wallet up in such a way that you can't figure out how to access your money, or screwing up and losing keys. So that is what I'd probably highlight as the major advantage of multisig, is that we're all human. And if you screw up and lose a key, multisig is the path to where there's a fallback and you don't lose access to your funds. And Seedsigner can be kind of this gateway drug to multisig, where, as I said, use a Seedsigner, set up a multisig wallet, make a few transactions, see how you feel about it. And then at that point, you could either use the Seedsigner to manage the multisig, or if you feel more comfortable, get some hardware wallets and incorporate them into the setup where you have a diversity of devices such that nothing is kind of this Achilles heel of the setup, to where if there's some sort of security flaw in one of the hardware wallets or somehow in Seedsigner that you didn't anticipate, or that was messed up, your money's still safe because you have this plurality of devices that all approach Bitcoin security from a little bit different angle. Some people think that I'm overly critical of hardware wallets, but the truth is, they're a different way of achieving the same end. Given my unique background in forensics and the tools that I had access to that were created or sponsored by the government that can be used to access, quote, secure devices like mobile phones, I was naturally skeptical of these proprietary devices that are made by private companies that are supposed to be able to keep your keys safe. My concerns in some cases may not be warranted, and people have been using hardware wallets for some time without any huge issues arising. But Bitcoin's growing, and as the value of the Bitcoin network grows, these threats, we have to think more carefully about them. We have to think more carefully about supply chain risk and a hardware wallet manufacturer being somehow compromised or subject to upstream technical risk in the components that they acquire to build their devices. As Bitcoin grows in value, some of the exploits that we're going to see are going to be really wild. And so what Seedsigner takes advantage of is the components that make one up are not Bitcoin specific. There are already deployed in the world 100 million Raspberry Pi single board computers, any of which could be used to build a Seedsigner. And the other components, the camera, the display and controls that we use, are also not Bitcoin specific. So one of the other advantages is that it allows you to build in the privacy of your own home this device that no one knows that you have and that didn't land you on some list of Bitcoiners. I bought a Ledger hardware wallet back in 2017, 2016-ish. And Ledger at one point had a leak where one of their customer list was compromised that included all sorts of horrible things, like not just your email address, but your name, the customer name, the address that the device was shipped to, the payment method, and all this kind of stuff. So avoiding being on as many lists of Bitcoiners as you can is definitely an advantageous strategy, where it's inevitable that you're probably going to sign up with an exchange, or sign up for a credit card or something. You won't be able to eliminate your footprint entirely, but especially with hardware wallets, not just because somebody can show up at your doorstep, but these hackers, or whatever we'll call them, people who exploit these kind of lists, send out these very clever emails that will catch people at exactly the wrong moment. So we've all probably gotten them. You'll receive an email that says it's from, say, Trezor, and it says something about a new firmware version and they'll usually give you some sort of urgency where they call you to action, like a security flaw has been discovered in our most recent firmware, and we need you to immediately update to this newest version to keep your coins safe. And you'll see that it'll look official, and you'll emotionally respond to it, and you'll click something that you shouldn't. And some of the dumbest ones are where they'll prompt people to enter their seed words into a browser window, which that's like a very basic no-no, but some small percentage of people will fall for this. Or they could point you to some sort of other software exploit that, I won't get into the details of how some of those things can work. And thankfully, a lot of these hardware wallet devices have onboard mechanisms that will validate whether or not good firmware is being loaded on the device. But as I said, like as the value of the Bitcoin network grows, we're going to see some crazy exploits. And so being able to build this device that was acquired from components that aren't Bitcoin specific gives me a certain amount of comfort in terms of my security posture. That may appeal to some other people who value their privacy and want to minimize their supply chain risk profile, but it's another tool set. Hardware wallets are potentially a great tool too, especially for use cases where you're making more frequent spends from a wallet. Seedsigner is really engineered for your long-term storage, like for the
Mhm.
money that is your generational wealth that you're planning on handing down to your kids, or that you're saving to buy a house in 10 years, or to set aside for your kids' college education or something like that. We're really optimized for that long-term storage use case where it's less convenient. There's a little more friction involved with using it, but what grows out of that is some additional security assurances. So
Yeah, you make a lot of really great points here, and some points I hadn't really even thought about. I really never I never formulated the idea, like, as Bitcoin grows in value, those attack vectors that you aren't really thinking of become more prevalent and a little bit scary. I mean, yeah, everybody kind of trusts Foundation, everybody trusts Cold Card and like NVK and Seth for privacy. Like, these people, like, they're Bitcoiners through and through. But what happens as we kind of develop into, the next epoch of Bitcoin and self-storage and security models? And like, those are back doors that we really don't want to leave our, as you said, our generational wealth up to that kind of chance. I mean,
as
like,
a
go ahead.
yeah, as a thought experiment, I don't know if you would remember it or not, but there was this is probably 3 or 4 years ago. There was a hack of Bitfinex several years ago, and hundreds of billions of dollars of Bitcoin at the time were exfiltrated from the exchange in this hack. And then a few years ago, somehow this goofy couple in New York ended up having the keys to these hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. I think there's actually a Netflix documentary on it that I saw a preview for just the other day. Um, Razzle Khan was this really eccentric couple where the female was kind of like a hip hop personality, and she had produced uh, rap videos on YouTube, and somehow this couple ended up being in custody of the private keys for these hundreds of millions of dollars, what is probably now billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. And it turned out that they had the seed phrase of the private key. I don't know which it was, which version of it, but it was stored in some sort of cloud storage. I think it was Dropbox. And the authorities were relatively easily able to access the key, recover the Bitcoin, and then secure it in their own fashion. But what if, hypothetically, instead of using a seed phrase on Dropbox or whatever they were doing, what if they had been storing those private keys on a Trezor or a Ledger? Now all of a sudden we're in a situation where you have a federal government, the U.S. federal government, that is highly motivated to be able to access this money. Otherwise that hardware wallet is going to sit in an evidence storage vault in a government building for the rest of forever until there's some way of accessing that money found. You have an immense amount of resources that are now focused on finding some sort of compromise to this device. And think about that in terms of the posture of hardware wallets moving forward. The amount of value that they're going to be securing is going to grow more and more insane, and it's going to end up being this kind of cat and mouse game, like it was with cell phones when they started developing smartphones started developing security features early on, where they would deploy a security feature, and then it's usually government funded private contractors that come up with some sort of way to circumvent or get around that security feature. So the Apple or Samsung or whoever will refine that security feature or introduce a new one. And it's this cat and mouse game of being able to subvert what the other side is doing. I think we're going to continue to see that with hardware wallets. There's another super interesting story I'd point your users to. You should be able to find it with a web search for a device called I'm going to need to think of it. Iron Key. Iron Key. And Iron Key was this encrypted thumb drive that caught my attention because when I was early on in my forensic career, I was actually presented with one of these, and it was this super secure device that you were able to put information on and have high confidence that it wouldn't be able to be accessed by anyone. Most of my work was in child exploitation, so occasionally I would have occasion that I would need to store and legally transport contraband material using some sort of secure device. And so that was what this device was presented to me for. But it was supposed to have the highest degree of encryption, and there were even hardware protections on the device. Whereas if you tried to open it was the profile of a thumb drive, and if you tried to open the device, there was some sort of acid that was released that would leak onto the board that would destroy the physically destroy the memory on the board. Anyhow, I remember having one of these, and I had a coworker who had also received one, and he had put some information on it, forgotten his password, and that information was thought to be lost forever. Anyhow, fast forward 7 or 8 years, um, there was someone with, it could have been Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency, who had been using one of these iron keys to store their private keys. They're probably, earlier on, before maybe even seed phrases were a thing. They were using it to store private keys, and they had forgotten their passphrase. And with these devices, there's a certain number of times that you can enter the passphrase incorrectly before the device will self-destruct. And they had entered all the way up to, say it's 10. They'd maybe done it 8 or 9 times. So they only had 1 or 2 tries left before it was going to self-destruct if the wrong password was entered. And they had solicited a number of contractors for help in finding some sort of exploit for this device that was supposedly fail-safe secure. And I think the company is called CipherTrace. There is a company that specializes in doing recoveries from hardware wallets and doing penetration testing on hardware wallets. But because this was Bitcoin or crypto related, and because of the sheer amount of value that was being stored on one of these iron key thumb drive devices, they launched, I think, what ended up being like a year-long research project in how to access the device, because they could offer the ability to access it and then collect some kind of finder's fee, whether it's not, it's 5% or whatever the pre-negotiated fee is. There's this tremendous economic incentive for them to spend, even several $1 million developing an exploit for this device. And after many months of reverse engineering and trying different exploits, they were able to reliably extract information from and access the data on one of these iron keys. And the article I read, I think it was in TechCrunch or something. The article it ended with, they had reached out to the individual who had data on one of these that was possibly trapped forever, and they were trying to negotiate an opportunity to access the actual device holding the keys in question. And I think they'd demonstrated that they'd reliably, with the same hardware and the same circumstances of there only being 1 or 2 tries left, they demonstrated they'd been able to access this information. They'd be able to recover the data. But long story of just illustrating what I think is we are still going to see tremendous resources come to bear on hardware wallet companies, and frankly Seedsigner and all the other devices and strategies that people use to create and safeguard private keys. So just a fun story, but yeah, be careful with those keys out there. Things are going to get crazy.
Yeah, I would say, you on your website, you talk about the 3 epochs of Bitcoin self-custody. And, we're going to see these epochs over time evolve, and you're going to see the hardware evolve, but you're also going to see, as you alluded to, just the sophistication of being able to crack some of these devices evolve as well. I had a conversation not too long ago with Jürgen Nitter, who is a ASIC board repair technician. And, he has a theory that quantum computing is going to be able to start cracking some of these older wallets and be able to infiltrate them. Now, I'm not smart enough to say whether that is true, whether that's false. These are the reasons why it's false or it's true. But it brings a good point to, always understand your security model and, make sure that you're updating that security model to the newest and most,
100%.
robust forms. So it's just important, it's Bitcoin. You're dealing with generational wealth at the end of the day. And whether you're a Bitcoin miner who's, accumulating these coins KYC free, or you're just a holder of Bitcoin and you're buying off of exchanges or from the open market, you're holding an asset that is the strongest, most secure, most incredible asset that we've ever seen on this planet, other than maybe our time. So it's very important that we take this seriously. Some people, and I would argue that these aren't real Bitcoiners, they're just wealth seekers. They just they buy it and they hold it on an exchange, or they do the bare minimum to secure those keys or the coins, and they just forget about it. That's really irresponsible in the world of Bitcoin. So,
Right.
long podcast, long-winded way of saying, not your keys, not your Bitcoins, and always make sure that you're updating your security model. It's super important. I'm really excited to get my hands on one of these devices. I think I'm actually going to buy a couple of them because, like I said, I have a few friends that I want to get involved with as well. I'm going to share your website. I've got a banner here. So at the bottom of you guys' screen right now, if you go to this website, you can see links to all the different places where you can buy it. There's a bunch of FAQs and videos that detail, like in great detail, show you how to build and connect and, set this device up. I think it's a great opportunity for anybody who wants to do it. You can get into this device for less than $50. I added up all the components from the different websites, and it came out to like $42 without the case. With the case, it's about $70 altogether. Out the door, it's a great opportunity for anybody who's looking to get into it. I highly recommend, just diving down this rabbit hole of understanding security, key storage, all of this stuff. I have one more question. Go ahead.
If I can just, as a real quick addendum, I looked at that article real quick. It's a Wired article titled "They Cracked the Code to a Locked USB Drive Worth $235 million in Bitcoin, Then It Got Weird." With what you were talking about at seedsigner.com, I'll just point out we have kind of two avenues that we can direct people down on the website. There's the DIY avenue, where we're happy to point you to different places, whether it's AliExpress or Raspberry Pi resellers, where you can buy the components to build a Seedsigner, or myself and other people operating at a kind of cottage industry scale. For people who are less familiar with DIY, or who are less technical, or maybe they're just time constrained and they'd like to have one, but they don't want to spend the time figuring out where to buy all the components, myself and others do sell them as kits, either assembled kits or kits that you can put together yourself with minimal tools and technical ability. So at the URL you're seeing at the bottom of the screen right now, we offer both of those options for whatever people would like to do. But I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead with what you were going to say next.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly all right. I appreciate you kind of adding that context, because the audience needs to know that, like, there are different opportunities for you depending on your skill set and your desirability to get into it. So I was just going to say, I have one more question for you, and if you're familiar with the show, you've heard this question asked before. If you're not, I want to ask you, what does Bitcoin mean to you?
That's like one of those esoteric questions out of the blue.
Yep.
What does Bitcoin mean to me? Bitcoin to me means, if we're looking for like one of these one word answers, it's freedom. It's the freedom to store the fruits of your labor in a better way that can't be debased or easily taken from you. I think if I had to distill it down to a one or two sentence answer, that is what it what it would be.
Yeah, that's a great response. Yeah, I like the esoteric. I like the philosophical, if that's even a word. I like to dive into that because one, it shows where people are coming to the space from, and it also shows your mindset and how you're looking at the world. For me, and my audience kind of knows this if they've been following a while, like Bitcoin is hope. Bitcoin is a lot of things. Bitcoin is freedom. Bitcoin is hope. Bitcoin is a new economic frontier. It's a lot of different things. But on the topic of freedom, I personally agree with you on this. For the first time in humanity's existence, we have a technological revolution that is allowing us to store our wealth and our money, which we trade for time, which is the second scarcest, the first scarcest resource that we have, store that in a secure way and project that into the future. And whether Bitcoin appreciates 1,000-fold or 100-fold or 2x fold, the fact of the matter is that if you put an hour's worth of your time into Bitcoin, it will be worth an hour's worth of time tomorrow. And that right there, to me, is one of the most important things about Bitcoin, because we've never had something like that. We've never had something where it can't be debased by kings and monarchs, and it can't be debased by government, and it can't be controlled, because we, the operators and the users of this technological revolution, are the controllers and the arbiters of the network. So it's a great way to look at it from that aspect of freedom, because for the first time you are free to use your money, which you trade for your time, in a way that you decide. So that was my long-winded way of kind of explaining that, but I appreciate you so much for your time today. We didn't really have much time to talk about it, so I'll give you just a couple minutes. I want to talk about the release that you guys are working on to make Seedsigner and signing devices a lot easier for people in other countries who don't speak the native language of English. You want to just take that wherever you will for a couple minutes?
Yeah, that's probably on the horizon. The most exciting thing near term. There's actually already the majority of the code has been written for it. I'll give a quick shout out to Keith Mukai, who's our lead developer, and we're super blessed to have him as a contributor to our project. He's an Ivy League educated computer scientist who I first met at Bitcoin Miami in 2021, I believe, and we made a good connection there, and the project resonated with him, and he's been an amazing contributor to our project, and now, as I said, our lead developer. So he's led the charge on multi-language support, and part of the impetus for multi-language support was the economic advantage of Seedsigner is one, as you talked about before, it's low cost to source the parts and build yourself. But then one of the advantages of it being a stateless device, or a device that does not persistently store your private keys or any record of your transactions or anything like that, in certain settings, I would say with very close friends or trusted family members, the device can be shared between individuals. So each person can use it for their own individual cold storage, either single sig wallet or even a multi-sig wallet. So in places like El Salvador and Africa and other places where the amount of Bitcoin that they're stacking may not have appreciated yet to the point where they feel like they could afford a commercial hardware wallet, but they would still like some sort of enhanced cold storage security posture, where they like to get advantage to get access to multi-sig or something like that. Seedsigner is really a valuable tool in these kinds of environments. And one type of feedback that we've received is that people would really like to be able to use the device in their own native language. We have a great interface that is graphically driven in a lot of ways and makes it more intuitive, even if you're not an English speaker. But really, it would be great if people could interact with a Seedsigner in their native language. So we're in the final stages of buttoning up this multi-language release that will deploy a small number of initial languages that will be added to our user interface as options. Right out of the gate, probably be Spanish, French, maybe Portuguese, and maybe one or two others. We have to focus on languages that have more similar character sets to English and that are left to right reading and such. Those are kind of the low-hanging fruit that we can work on first. Once we have those into a release, we're going to work on some of the languages that may be a little bit more difficult to implement, like languages that just use longer character sets like German, or languages that read right to left or bottom up, like Chinese or Hebrew or other languages similar to those. I'm not a linguist, so I can't quote everything right off the bat. But yeah, we're excited to give more people the opportunity to learn about Bitcoin and take control of their cold storage in their language. So that's something that's on the horizon that we're really excited about.
You guys are pushing the needle over there, man. Like we need projects and developments like this. So, you know, as a user of this kind of stuff, and you know, I'm sure the audience will agree with me. I just want to say thank you so much for the work that you're putting in, the effort that you're putting in to build this software and this hardware for us to use and secure our Bitcoin, our wealth, and our time, and project that into the future. So I just really want to say I appreciate.
I appreciate that. I encourage your listeners to give it a whirl. One possible maybe parallel is that like Seedsigner is the BitX of cold storage, or that BitX is the Seedsigner of mining. It's kind of
Yeah.
like they're very comparable ethos, but I would
Mm-hmm.
say that people who are doing mining either on an in-home scale or on, you know, a little bit more larger, smaller industrial scale, your listeners are probably already predisposed to this kind of thing. So I would encourage them to dig in and learn a little bit. I think it's something that they would really appreciate if they look into it a little bit more closely.
I 100% agree with that. That is something that everybody who's listening to this is, you know, they understand Bitcoin. They don't quite understand mining to the full extent, but they probably understand the ethos of open source and decentralization. And that's really what the Seedsigner is. And I love how you compared that to BitX, which is like the Trojan horse of open source software, man. Like that thing is amazing. I got mine sitting right up here. I actually have have you seen the white paper edition from IX Tech Solutions?
Yeah, that is very well done as yeah, a display piece. It
Yeah.
gets a lot of things just right.
Yeah, it's a beautiful device. I can't wait till I get mine. I guess he actually sent one to the Bitcoin, think it's Bitcoin Dad, who's got the Bitcoin Museum. So it's actually
Oh, cool.
it's kind of like in a cool case, and it's on
Yeah.
display. So, you know, it's a piece of history really. And maybe, you know, it'd be really cool to get like a white paper edition Seedsigner and slap that thing right next to it, because open source software and just the nature of that kind of tech is really the foundation of Bitcoin. It's the whole ethos.
Yeah,
So
I'll throw out really quickly. So by virtue of being open source and an open platform, there's actually available at a couple of different places. There's a really premium milled aluminum anodized Seedsigner enclosure that transforms what is kind of a hacky DIY device into something that is comparable with something you'd find at the Apple Store. It's like the most premium Seedsigner experience. There's this super talented metal worker, artisan. To me, he's kind of a magician, but he's based out of Europe and leveraged his metalworking skills to create what is like the definitive Seedsigner experience in these beautiful aluminum enclosures. So if someone is in the market for something with a more premium feel like you were referencing with the white paper edition of the BitX, that's kind of something comparable on our end.
hell yeah. Well, I guess that's pretty much it. You know, we've run for about an hour and 9 minutes. We had a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time today to kind of explain all these things and get our listeners on board. I'm going to send everyone again to the website that's been scrolling across the bottom of the screen. There will be a link in the description of the video. Is there like a Twitter or a Telegram you'd like to send people to as well? That's just Seedsigner on Twitter, correct? X.
Yeah, Seedsigner.com is a great handoff. Our project is represented on Twitter, as you said, just by Seedsigner, 2 words together, no spaces or dashes or anything. And at the .com website, you can find we have a super active and very welcoming Telegram community where people can ask questions about building a Seedsigner or using it once they've built it, or making suggestions for new features, or just to interact with our developers. It's a great resource, and probably everything else you could want to know you can find from that seedsigner.com website.
Cool. Well, I will make sure that's all linked to the show notes. And with that, guys, this has been the Build a Mind podcast. This is episode 47. No, 48. We're getting close to 50. By the end of the year, it'll be 50. It's been an exciting thing for me to just get to facilitate some of these conversations that we've had. I've learned so much from our different array of guests. So if you enjoyed today's episode, if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a like, a comment, share it out for, helping us get that algo recognition. And with that, we will see you on the next episode of the Build Mind Pod. Thank you so much for being here.
Appreciate the invite.
Please note, the Build a Mind podcast provides information for general educational purposes only. This information should not be construed as legal, financial, or investment advice. We do not guarantee the accuracy or completeness of any information presented, and we encourage you to consult with a professional advisor, legal advisor, and/or financial advisor before making any financial decisions. The Build a Mind podcast and its affiliates are not responsible for any losses incurred as a result of using the information provided.